Hi, I am Liz Soychak, and I am a pillar of Justice and Beyond, and I'm a proud member of FNO Energy Future New Orleans Coalition. And I'd like to introduce Jesse George, who is the New Orleans Policy Director of the great folks at Alliance for Affordable Energy, who is going to talk to us about some super important stuff having to do with our our utility rates. Take it away, Jesse.
Thanks for the introduction, Liz. Yeah, I'm Jesse George, the Alliance for Affordable Energy. We've been around since 1985 as a consumer watchdog for utility ratepayers in the state of Louisiana. And we are proud members of the Energy Future New Orleans Coalition, or FNO for short. FNO, to give you a little bit of background for those who aren't familiar, was established in 2018 in opposition to the construction of the New Orleans Power Station, the fossil gas-fired power plant out in New Orleans East. Some of y'all might remember that. Entergy was found to be paying actors to convince the council to grant them permission to build this plant. The council ended up fining them for doing that, but they granted them permission to build the plant anyway, based on the promise that it would, quote unquote, black start during a catastrophic outage. And then, of course, in 2021, when Hurricane Ida hit the city, we saw that was put to the lie because that plant sat dark for days after the storm, just as we predicted, the FNO coalition. And yet we've stuck around since 2018 as a coalition of neighborhood associations and civic organizations, faith institutions, and just individual people who are dedicated to energy justice issues in New Orleans. And we have conceived a new campaign called Light is Your Right. And I need to shout out at this point Sage Michael Pellet, who conceived of the name of this campaign and has done a lot of the thinking behind it. But really what we're trying to accomplish through this campaign, Light is Your Right, is to have the City Council of New Orleans recognize utility access as a human right. When the COVID pandemic began back in 2020, the Alliance for Affordable Energy became involved with a group of folks, including the National Consumer Law Center and the Natural Resources Defense Council, among others, who created a document called a Roadmap to Utility Access as a Human Right, trying to convince regulators across the country to recognize this critical need as a human rights issue. To get a little esoteric, when we were first brainstorming this campaign, Sage Michael and I were talking about how access to sources of light and heat and even water are basic needs, and across cultures are considered sacred. I'm a citizen of Cherokee Nation. We have a very important story in our tradition about how we received the first fire. Many native tribes across Turtle Island have stories like that, and many cultures around the world have those kinds of stories, because on a fundamental level, we recognize that access to these things is a basic need of survival. Now, what's happened over the course of history is that these things have become increasingly commodified, and now they're sold to us by for-profit companies that too often put the desires and needs of their shareholders above the needs of ratepayers and consumers. So we have launched this campaign as a way to bring people into our FNO coalition and to pressure the council to recognize utility access as a human right. And one of our big demands is to end residential disconnections for non-payment for utilities. And so, among other things, we're looking to resolve bill dispute issues, create an arrearage management program for folks who fall into utility debt that helps them stay out of utility debt in the future by hooking them up with energy efficiency improvements in their homes. So these are just some of the demands that we have made of the council, and we're looking to build community support to exert pressure on the council to act on these things that we've called on them to do. I know I just said a lot, so I'll pause here. And if any of y'all have any questions about the campaign, I'd be happy to answer those now.
I have a question. So you keep talking about the city council and the utility, but what's their relationship, and who's actually running the utility, and how many utilities do we have?
That's a great question. So we're in a somewhat unique position here in the city of New Orleans because we have a home rule charter that grants our city council the authority to regulate utilities within Orleans Parish. We are one of two municipal councils in the country, the other being Washington, D.C., that has regulatory authority over an investor-owned utility. Ours happens to be Entergy New Orleans. The council also regulates Cox, cable, and to some extent the Sewerage and Water Board, although it's a little bit more complicated there. In terms of our electric and gas utility, Entergy New Orleans, the city council has total regulatory authority over that utility.
And I'll hop in here. So what about bills? So like how are people's electricity or utility bills looking these days? Have you heard anything on that front?
Well, I mean, at the Alliance for Affordable Energy, we receive calls basically on a weekly basis from people who have received outrageous, unaffordable bills. Michael Isaac Stein, who was formerly with Verite News here in New Orleans, published a great piece last year doing an analysis of Entergy New Orleans bills over the years. And he found that, in fact, over the last few years, bills have reached a record high. And I think that that investigative reporting only confirmed what a lot of people have experienced themselves here in the city. And we know for a fact, too, that New Orleans is one of the cities in the country that has the highest energy burden. So that means folks here in New Orleans pay a higher percentage of their household income toward their utility bills than in other jurisdictions. And in fact, the lowest income people in the city pay the highest proportion of their household income toward utility bills. In some cases, upward of 28% of household income going just to keep the lights on in the house. And clearly that is unaffordable and an unsustainable way to live. And something has to be done for ratepayers who are struggling to meet these outrageous bills.
Jesse, you said something. 28% of people's incomes going towards paying bills. That's a quarter of their total income. I think that's why I believe that, we talk about this whole thing that light is a right. So, I know personal experience. I'm being born and raised in New Orleans, personal family experiences. My family had to make choices between putting food in the fridge or paying a light bill. It's like, which choice you gonna make? If you buy the food and the lights out, the food gonna spoil. If you're gonna pay a light bill, you're not getting no food in the fridge. Paying the lights or paying the rent. Like literally, paying the lights or going on field trips or knowing that the whole school year you are not going on field trips because your people got to pay the light bill, right? Those are the type of choices they make. So I think that's why we really believe that light is your right. And when we talk about high bills and cost burden, who bearing the burden? Like, let's put a face on that and let's put a name on that. And who are the people that's making these decisions, that's putting these burdens on these people?
That would be our regulators, the city council and the utility executives at Entergy. You mentioned the folks who sort of fall through the cracks because they can't afford their bills. I mentioned the calls that we receive at the Alliance for Affordable Energy, people having to make choices between, paying for prescriptions or paying their utility bills. And it's just not a choice that anybody should ever have to make for such a critical service. We here in New Orleans, not only are we unique in having regulatory authority over an investor-owned utility like Entergy New Orleans, but we're also unique in that we are on the front lines of a changing climate, and we are experiencing that on a more and more regular basis, not only with increasing and more frequent increasingly frequent and more intense hurricanes, but also extreme heat and cold events. We even now have a tornado season in the spring, which I don't recall from my own childhood. But these kinds of events are increasing in frequency. And during these events and, after, it's important and vital to have utility access. We've already touched on Hurricane Ida that hit in 2021. Most of the deaths associated with Hurricane Ida in Louisiana didn't come from debris or wind or flooding, but they came from a lack of power when the utilities were down, from people either being trapped in buildings where elevators weren't working or where they couldn't keep cool, folks having to use portable generators that create toxic fumes. All of these things in one way or another are associated with not having access to power after a disaster. And especially during extreme heat and cold events, there may be prohibitions on disconnecting folks when temperatures are above a certain threshold. But 100 degrees or 99 degrees to the human body is not that big of a difference. And so even though your power might be disconnected on a day when there isn't a heat advisory, the very next day there might be one, and you would be out of power and unable to cool yourself and your family. And so we're simply saying that it's unacceptable in this day and age for anyone to die or to suffer needlessly from a lack of such a basic critical service.
Jesse, and I'm just going to quickly follow up. I know we're going to close in a second, but just tell me quickly, I heard that entity is guaranteed to make a profit, and who has to make sure that profit is made? We do when we pay our bills, right?
That's right. They're not guaranteed the right to make a profit, but they are guaranteed the opportunity to make a profit. And that profit comes directly from ratepayers. We pay every dime that Entergy makes comes from us. We've, like I said before, we've experienced a crisis of unaffordability in this city to the point where we have a utility that is disconnecting 19% of residential users each year. Nearly 1 out of 5 Entergy New Orleans customers was disconnected for the inability to pay their bill in 2023. To give you some context, the national average, according to the United States Energy Information Administration, is about 9%. So Entergy is fully 10 points over the national average for residential disconnections for non-payment. I would say that even 9% is too high for a national average, but 19%, or nearly 1 out of every 5 people, is simply outrageous.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in. This is Liz again, and say that really seems crazy in the context of the fact that our city council has the right to regulate this utility, Entergy, that 19% of ratepayers are getting disconnected. When we have that regulation ability, that just is very, very unfair. And as a ratepayer, I personally don't like to pay high energy bills. And I feel like we live in the kind of, we're lucky enough to live in a place where we can have a lot of renewable energy. We can have a lot of solar power here, and we can have a lot of wind power here. And so that's coming on board. And I really want to, through Climate Reality Project, which I'm part of, and 315 New Orleans, I've advocated for that, and these groups have advocated for it. But like, what else, what else should or could ratepayers be doing to advocate for better rates and more renewable energy? What do you feel like are effective paths, and how can they get involved in this campaign?
Great question. Well, because we have that regulatory authority here in New Orleans, it gives us the opportunity to do extraordinary things that, we might not be able to accomplish otherwise. Some of the things that the FNO Coalition has been able to accomplish, for instance, has been the passage of a renewable and clean portfolio standard here in the city. One of the first of its kind in the South, a policy that requires Entergy New Orleans to meet an escalating percentage of customer demand using clean, renewable energy resources. But what we really need is people power, and that is the whole goal of the Light is Your Right campaign, is to bring people into our FNO coalition to exert power and influence on the council on utility issues to achieve energy justice in this city. Sage Michael kind of alluded to the fact that it's our regulators, the council, and Entergy executives who are making these decisions that affect us on a day-to-day basis. And while those Entergy executives are certainly in the ears of our regulators, it's hard to ignore a mass movement of people, of citizens who are demanding their rights and demanding fair and affordable rates and utility service in this city. So we really need folks to join our FNO coalition. Contact an FNO member, one of the folks on this call today, or myself, Jesse George. You can contact me at jesse@all4energy.org. That's JESSE at all four, as in the numeral 4energy.org. Ask to get on our FNO listserv. Come to our regular FNO call. We have a standing call every Thursday morning at 10 a.m. And through our listserv, we put out calls to action on a regular basis when the council is taking up issues that affect utility access and energy justice issues. We encourage people to submit comments either online through the online comment portal, which we can help you do, or even better, to show up in person at the city council when we put out calls to action, so that the council sees you face to face and knows that people are paying attention to their role as regulator of Entergy New Orleans and are demanding more of them than what we've gotten in the past. So yeah, I would just encourage folks to come on board the FNO coalition. You don't have to make every Thursday call. You don't have to make every action, but the more of us together moving toward these goals, the more likely we are to succeed.
Jesse, thank you so much. Does anybody have any final questions before we end today?
No, thank you.
I have a question. How many council members represent me?
So every person in this city is represented by 3 city council members. Both your district council member through one of the 5 council districts, and 2 at-large council members. Our 2 at-large council members happen to be Helena Moreno, who is the chair of the Climate and Sustainability Committee of the New Orleans City Council, and JP Morrell, who is the chair of the Utility Committee. And so both of those committees work on these utility and energy justice issues, and both of those council members represent everyone in the city. And they need to hear from you and from all of us in a coordinated effort to oppose Entergy, because otherwise Entergy gets its way.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. And thanks, Jesse, for the info. And hopefully we will see several more people at the FNO meeting on Thursday mornings.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank y'all.